The natural sense of self is made up of healthy building blocks. This is the healthy self. This is the unhealthy self. The healthy self is composed of 6 layers. The first layer, the white one at the bottom, represents the unconscious spiritual self. It is our spirit as it has been born in this life. The second layer, the red one, represents the embodied self, the self as body, a concept that is shared with animals. The third layer, the yellow one, represents the self as a conscious thought form, the object of the consciously felt sense of I, or concept myself. The fourth layer, the green one, represents the psycho-emotional self, the content of my thoughts and feelings. The fifth layer, the blue one, represents the social self, myself in relation to others. The sixth and final layer, the white one at the top, represents the conscious spiritual self, myself in relation to God or the ultimate. All these healthy layers together create the healthy self. The healing process, shown at full speed. Let's break the healing process down step by step to get a better understanding of what's really going on. As you see in the picture, there are 2 selves, the mother at the right-hand side and the child at the left-hand side. The mother here is representative of the source of deviation in the healthy development of the child. As the focus of this video is on the child self, in this example, the mother self is represented as a perfect self, even though in reality, the mother self is often just as damaged as the child's. The child is the one with a structure of the self-experience of a person with a lack of sense of self. This lack of sense of self leads to dependency on a substitute sense of self. This model of the child's self should be compared to the healthy self with its perfect 6 layers, to understand the child's deviations. The basic 2 layers of the child's self are in the same position as the healthy self. However, all the other layers have been damaged, ripped apart, or changed in some way or another. The most important aspect of the child's self is its connection and attachment to the mother self. It is the proverbial umbilical cord that has been preserved too long. This is the representation of the extreme situation in which the child lives. Its self is not only attached to the mother, but it is enmeshed. The brown stones showing in the picture are merely technical support aids to sustain the structure and have no meaning. What you will see next are the steps that need to be taken for the healing process of the child's self. The first step in the healing process of the child's self is to make sure the unhealthy attachment to the mother self in everyday life is cut off. This can be done by actively moving away from her to a different location, by stopping to interact with her, or by putting up a mental guard while interacting, or by natural causes such as death of the mother. From infancy on, the child's unhealthy sense of self has constantly been fed by the mirroring vibes of the unhealthy, narcissistic, psycho-emotional layer of the mother, who is unable to relate to the child as an independent being. This unhealthy mirroring creates a substitute sense of self for the child, which involves a dramatic tear within its structure of self. This tear is caused by the lack of connection between the child's third layer, the self as a conscious thought form, and second layer, the embodied self. In other words, the child's sense of self is significantly and unhealthily disconnected from her experience of her own body. Healing this separation of the two layers in such a way that the self as a conscious thought form is supported by self as embodiment is what is required in order to allow a restored sense of self to develop and be sustained. The experience of I has to be healed, expanded to include my body. When, in the now adult child's life, the mother is no longer available to function as an ongoing source of potential positive evaluation that is needed to maintain the substitute sense of self, the third layer of the child, the self as a conscious thought form, becomes mixed and intertwined with its very own fourth layer, the psycho-emotional layer of self, and its fifth layer, the social self. In real life, this means that in order for the child to constantly renew its substitute sense of self, which is its only sense of existence, it becomes dependent on its own evaluation of its performance, the inner critic, as well as on the evaluations by others. This self-supply of the needed evaluation is represented in this demo by showing how bits of the color blue that represent social factors and actually belong in the blue layer, as well as bits of green, feelings, thoughts, factors, originating from the green psycho-emotional layer of self, contaminate the more basic conscious yellow layer of self as a conscious thought form. This yellow layer ought to be free of those colors, independent from influences of those social and psycho-emotional aspects. The foundational sense of I am of a healthy person does not require particular thoughts or feelings resulting from the person's actions, nor particular vibes from the others in response to their actions. The mother is now removed from the picture. The child is grown up. But the sense of self as a conscious thought form is still split into two pieces. The disconnection between the second and the third layer is still there, even though there is no direct attachment or even contact from the child to the mother. The relationship was devastating for the child's development of a sense of self, but without the mother it has no idea where to get the sense of identity from. So the second step in the healing process is to merge those parts together through tremendous mental effort and persistence in healing exercises. This split-off conscious thought form layer of the way the self is experienced must be merged in such a way that it becomes completely supported by the second layer, the embodied self. In real life, this merger can be achieved through a continuous effort to connect to your body, to make your body real and me. You must increase your body awareness and consciously make the link between the self and the body. More than a link, the body must become part of your identity as I. I must become fully embodied. The third step brings with it a major healing/cleaning time. The grown child has some major psychological and emotional cleaning up to do. The fourth and fifth layers, the green and blue, are still bleeding into the third, the yellow layer. In other words, the person's foundational sense of being an independently existing being is still unhealthily dependent on their achieving certain feelings through improving the ego references, achieving the hidden agenda, and through approval from others. These are the feel-good about self feelings that function as a substitute sense of self. The green elements represent the need to perform well, and to feel good about self for doing so. Those displaced green elements originate in the psycho-emotional layer and comprise of these three factors. A. The enmeshment with the mother persists in the form of a need for own and others' approval. B. This need results in continuous inner self-criticism or self-approval based on learned behavior of expectations and performance that were deducted and accepted in childhood. C. The desperate addiction to feel good about self, because that's the only way any sense of self is experienced. The blue elements represent what's going on in the social self layer. Instead of making choices based on an authentic self, choices are made to facilitate the internal process of creating a sense of self that is solely based on feel good about self. After the third and fourth layers are cleaned, which means the grown child's sense of self becomes more based on their body, and less based on their meeting inner expectations and getting outer approval, those layers are still too unstable and too thin. The fourth step implies strengthening the cleaned up layers as the grown child, even though now having a healthier sense of self, is still very vulnerable. Much time and effort needs to be applied to grow and fill out the layers, so that ultimately they become strong and healthy. Growing additional strength in the layers stands from achieving an identity which is fully embodied, and which persists in spite of any kind of performance results, good or bad, any kind of temporary feelings of self-approval, and any opinions of others. This now is a restored sense of self. The fifth and final step occurs as the grown child becomes more and more healthy, experiences more and more as a full restored sense of self. In this final step, and almost as a bonus, the opportunity is created to actively build the sixth and top layer, the layer of the conscious spiritual self, which on the original distorted structure of self would have never stand a chance to evolve. The crown of existing, the conscious spiritual awareness of self, would have never developed. The unhealthy content and relationships of the building blocks of a full sense of self have become healthy ones, and the substitute sense of self has changed into a restored sense of self. These final pictures show as a person with a healthy, natural, or restored sense of self lives independently from others with a healthy sense of self. Here we can finally speak of independence. Two independent human beings that function interdependently. By being self-sufficient psycho-emotionally, there is a freedom in being who one is. When we relate to others who enjoy that same freedom, there are no hidden agendas to fill our gaping needs of getting a substitute sense of self, or, in other words, a feel-goods about self. When two or more people with a healthy, natural, or restored sense of self interact, it is about the content of their interaction, to get something done. The focus now is on the actual objective people interact about, and due to their healthy nature of the relationship, the chances of a positive outcome are big. This is how the world can be made a better place, because it is the one and only true healthy way of interpersonal relating and effectively getting things done in society. Finally, a community functioning interdependently. We are all equal and equally yet diverse selves,